The shivering sea was a single sheet of hammered pewter, as if some god had struck it flat and left it to freeze. Wind came shrieking off that gray expanse, full of old salt and new snow, and scoured the faces of the men who fought their way along the coast. Ice crunched beneath hooves and boots, a brittle music beneath the harsher chorus of the gale. Tormund Giantsbane spat into the snow and watched it vanish at once. The wind stole even spit from a man up here. Too far from any fire that matters, he grumbled, stamping his feet inside cracked leather. Too close to the bloody edge of the world. The free folk moved with him in a loose, wary line. Spears of weirwood and dragonglass, old shields strapped to fur-wrapped arms, eyes red-rimmed from the cold. They were not the ragged, frightened host that had once fled south through the tunnel beneath the wall. They were fewer now and harder. The ones who had survived Hardhome and the long road after, the ones who had bled for Jon Snow and seen a dragon burn the dead. "Tracks," called a woman ahead, her voice sharp as shivered ice. Tormund trudged up the slope to where she knelt. The wind clawed at his red beard as he squinted down. Hoofprints marred the old snow, pressed deep and fresh, too many for a stray patrol. "Not our folk," the woman said. "Horses from south, shod like kneelers." Tormund scowled. "No one with sense rides north now." He straightened, scanning the white world. The sea to their right, the shadow of the Frostfangs far to their left, the low gray sky pressing down on both. No wall stood between them and the dead any longer. At Eastwatch, the ice had fallen, leaving broken blue-white teeth jutting into empty air. The Night King had marched his army west along the wall's corpse, leaving the coast empty but for ghosts and fools, or fools and something else. "Could be crows," one of the men said. "The Black Brothers wandering again, like when they took us at Hardhome." "Could be dead crows now," another replied. "Or worse." Tormund squinted at the prince again. The gait was steady, not the dragging lurch of wights, nor the aimless wandering of men lost. Whoever rode here knew where they went. "The wolf boy should know," he muttered. "Jon Snow likes surprises as much as he likes my jokes." Soft laughter flickered along the line, snatched away by the wind. Tormund lifted his hand. "We follow," he decided. Eyes open, bows knocked. If they're dead, we kill them again. If they're living, we see if they mean us harm before we take what they carry. No one argued. Up here, you learn to take or die. They moved faster now, following the churned path. The prince led them inland, away from the sea, over a series of low, rolling hills. Snow came thicker, a curtain that swallowed distance. Shapes rose ahead, boulders, half buried in drifts. Behind them, the wind changed, carrying a faint sound that did not belong to the storm. The distant clink of harness, the murmur of human voices. Tormund lifted a hand again, bringing the column to a halt. His heart thudded once, hard, like a fist on a door. "Up," he said quietly. "The rocks. Make ready." The free folk melted into the terrain, as they had 100 times before. Slipping behind stones, lying flat along ridges, pulling white-furred cloaks over their backs. Bows creaked, spear points glimmered. Tormund crouched behind a tooth of stone, breath frosting in the air, watching the white ahead. The shapes came slowly into view, drawn from the snow like memories. Horsemen wrapped in mismatched furs over Southron armor, faces hidden beneath hoods. A thin banner snapped above them, some old sigil faded nearly white. At their head rode a tall figure in a heavy cloak, the hood thrown back despite the wind. Silver hair spilled over his shoulders, long and loose, whipped by the gale. His face was lean as a drawn sword, cheekbones sharp, mouth set in a line that might have once remembered how to smile. A dark, plain scabbard hung at his hip. Across his back, wrapped in oilcloth, the shape of something long and narrow. A harp, Tormund realized with a stab of surprise. Who dragged music to the end of the world? "On my word," Tormund murmured. No sooner. The stranger's head turned, as if he heard the words or the thought of them. His eyes swept the rocks without haste, pale and distant. When they passed over Tormund's hiding place, the giant felt a prickle run down his spine, as if he had been weighed and measured. The column slowed. A man beside the silver-haired rider leaned close, speaking urgently. The rider lifted a hand, and the whole line came creaking to a halt in the snow. He swung from his saddle with the grace of a man who had lived on horseback all his life, boots sinking into the drift. For a moment he only stood, head cocked, listening to the wind. Then, to Tormund's utter disbelief, he reached back, drew the oilcloth-wrapped shape from his shoulder, and unwrapped it. A harp, old wood, polished dark by long use, strings glinting dully in the gray light. "What in all the gods' cold piss?" Tormund began. The man's fingers touched the strings. Sound bloomed in the snow, thin but clear, cutting through wind and distance. A melody of simple notes, threaded together with such care that Tormund's chest ached at once. It was not a song he knew, yet it felt like something he ought to recognize. Some old thing from before walls and kings and white shadows in the woods. He found himself lowering his hand, the signal dying before it was given, as the stranger's music carried across the icebound hills. The harp's voice threaded through the storm, a thin silver line of sound. It should have been lost at once, swallowed by the wind, but it was not. It slipped between the gusts, into the hollows where men crouched with drawn bows and laid a hand over their hearts. The free folk shifted uneasily in their hiding places. One man blinked, his bowstring slackening by inches. A woman with a missing ear swore under her breath and wiped at the corner of her eye, surprised to find it wet. "Magic," someone whispered. "Music," Tormund muttered back, though his own chest felt tight. Southron foolishness. Yet it was more than that. The melody tugged at old aches, at suns long set, at the memory of children's laughter in caverns now full of bones. It was a sad song, but not hopeless. The notes rose and fell like breath in cold lungs, like waves under ice. Tormund had never heard of lords who played harps, but something in the way the man stood, straight-backed and unbowed, even here at the edge of nowhere, spoke of birth and training that had nothing to do with scrabbling a life from half-frozen dirt. As he played, the silver-haired rider turned slowly toward the rocks. His gaze passed again over where Tormund's people lay hidden. This time it lingered. The man's eyes were a strange, pale violet gray, ringed by fine lines that spoke of years and sleepless nights. He inclined his head, the barest nod, as though acknowledging an audience behind the stones. Then, gently, he let the last note hang and die. "Come out," he called, his voice carrying eerily far. The common tongue, with a soft lilt beneath it, as if he had learned the words in another land and worn them thin with use. "This is no land for enemies, not now." Tormund swore, straightened, and rose from behind the rock. Snow slid from his furs. He stepped into the open, spear in hand, and saw the man's eyes widen a fraction. "Big bastard, aren't you?" the stranger said quietly. "Big enough to stick that pretty harp up your arse if you lied to me," Tormund shot back. He lifted his spear a little, and behind him the free folk revealed themselves by degrees, heads rising over stones, bodies emerging from the snow, faces hard with suspicion, weapons ready. The mounted men shifted, hands going to swords. The silver-haired stranger lifted his hand again, and they stilled. That simple gesture, Tormund noticed, had obedience baked into it like bread. Men who followed that hand were used to doing so. "You're far north for a Southron lord," Tormund said. "Even for a fool." "I have been far from home a very long time," the man replied. "North, south, and further still. But I am no lord. Not anymore." He slung the harp back across his shoulder with a care that bordered on reverence, then let his hand fall to the hilt at his side. Not drawing, merely resting there, as if the sword were part of him. "I come seeking someone," he went on. "A man who once wore black and now wears a crown he never wanted. We walked together in a dream, he and I, through snow and shadow. He is needed, and he will die if I do not reach him." Tormund's grip tightened on his spear. Lots of men wore black, he said. This one died in it, the stranger said softly, and returned. The wind clawed between them. Tormund studied the man's face. There was something in his eyes that he recognized. The haunted look of those who had seen the dead rise and press their hands to warm flesh. Yet this man spoke of it not like a tale heard secondhand, but as one who had walked in that darkness himself. You talk like a red witch, Tormund said. All shadow and fire. I have known worse than red priests, the stranger replied, and better. His gaze flicked north a moment, toward the invisible line of the wall's corpse, and something like disgust crossed his face. You follow the White Walkers, he said. It was not a question. You have seen their king. I've seen him, Tormund said, remembering ice-blue eyes looking down from a cliff, arms spread as the dead rose from the beach at Hardhome. He killed the dragon too, burned blue like his eyes. That made the stranger flinch, just a small tightening around his mouth, but enough. His hand clenched around his sword hilt. A dragon, he murmured. So that part was true as well. What part? Tormund demanded. The man's gaze came back to him, sharp. You did not answer my first question. Do you ride for Jon Snow? Tormund hesitated, then shrugged. I ride for myself and my people. Sometimes that means I ride with Jon Snow, sometimes ahead of him, sometimes to drag his stubborn arse out of trouble. The stranger's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. Then we seek the same man, he said. I would ride with you, Giantsbane, if you will have me. The way south is thick with Wights. Some of my men have already fed them. Yours are tired. Together, we may keep more of them breathing. Tormund narrowed his eyes. You call me by name, he said slowly. As you guessed, I know a red priest or two, the man said. They showed me faces, told me stories. You were in some of them, laughing mostly. Good, Tormund grunted, hiding the unease that slid along his spine. Be a dull life otherwise. He spat again, more for form's sake than anything, and wiped the back of his hand across his beard. All right, Silverhead, he said. You and your sad songs can ride with us. But if you turn out to be some kind of dead thing walking, I'll take your pretty harp and your pretty sword and leave what's left for the crows. Fair, the man said simply. He took a step forward, boots crunching, and inclined his head in something that was not quite a bow and not quite anything else. Some old courtesy from a world Tormund had never walked. My name is, he began. The wind rose, shrieking across the hills, cutting him off. In it, distant and faint, came another sound. A thin, inhuman howl, multiplied 100-fold. The sound of Wights on the MOV. The man's head snapped toward it at once, every line of his body tightening. Later, he said, and his hand dropped from the harp to the sword. We must move. The first of the Wights appeared as flawed smudges in the snow, as if some careless god had dragged charred fingers across the white world. Then they grew, took shape. Men and women and children, all wrong in the ways that mattered. Skins stretched too thin over bone, clothes torn and frozen stiff, limbs at twisted angles that did not slow them at all. The thing that had once been a boy dragged a broken leg behind him, leaving a crooked line in the snow. His eyes burned an unholy blue. Archers! Tormund roared, the old battle fire snapping him out of his unease. Loose when they're close enough to see the rot in their teeth. The free folk moved like a machine hammered together in blood and hardship. Bows rose. Dragonglass-dipped arrows whispered onto strings. Southron exiles looked around, faces pale, and scrambled to mimic them. Swords rasped from sheaths, shields swung down. The silver-haired stranger. He had a name, Tormund knew, but the storm had stolen it. Stepped forward without waiting for an order. His sword slid from its scabbard with a low, hungry whisper that seemed to pull the heat from the air around it. The blade was darker than the sky, a shade of deep, rippling gray-black that caught the light like water. No gemstone flashed from its hilt. Only worn leather wrapped around steel, polished smooth by years of use. Tormund had seen Valyrian steel before. He had watched Jon Snow carve through dead things with Longclaw's pale blade, had seen the Night King's lieutenants shatter like glass under it. This sword was of that same kin, though humble and unadorned, like a lord who had outlived his own pomp. The stranger moved up beside Tormund, snow catching in his hair and lashes. His face, up close, looked older than Tormund had first thought. Not in years exactly, but in weight. Eyes that had seen far too much, and yet still watched the world with a sort of fierce, stubborn hope. "Tell your archers to aim for the joints," he said calmly. "Hips, knees, shoulders. They feel no pain. Only break them apart." "You think I've not been killing dead men for years now?" Tormund growled, but he jerked his chin anyway. The word passed along the line. The Wights came on, heedless of arrows that began to fall among them. Dragonglass punched through skulls and spines, snapping them back into the snow. They clawed to their feet again, only to be knocked down a second time as more shafts thudded into unfeeling flesh. The ones that kept coming, dragging arrows like black quills, hit the first line of spears. The storm narrowed, shrank. The world became the small space in front of each man and woman, the weight of the spear in their hands, the stench of old death gusting on their faces. Screams and snarls, the wet crunch of bone. Tormund planted his feet and met the first Wight with a roar, driving his spear clean through its chest. It did not so much as flinch. Its hands clawed up the shaft toward him, fingers grasping, nails black and thick. He kicked at its knee, felt something snap, crumpled, still writhing. Beside him, the stranger moved like water poured into a mold of steel. His dark blade cut a slow, deliberate arc through the air, and a Wight lost its head. The body thrashed and fell. Another lunged at him from the side, fingers hooked like claws, and became two neat halves before it ever touched him. He did not bellow or snarl as he fought. He did not waste breath on curses. He stepped and turned, sword drawing lines through the air that ended in broken things. He fought the way he had played the harp, with precision and feeling, as if every movement were a note in some grim song. A Wight hurled itself at Tormund, too close for the spear. It smacked into his chest, teeth snapping inches from his face. Its breath was a puff of grave cold. Tormund dropped the spear and seized it by the throat with both hands, thumbs digging into clammy flesh. Thrashed like a hooked fish, before he could smash its head into the nearest rock, the dark blade slid neatly between its ribs, splitting spine. The Wight went limp. The stranger wrenched his sword free, meeting Tormund's eye. "You fight well," he said, as if they were sparring in some warm hall, not standing hip-deep in the dead. "You're not bad for a Southron singer," Tormund grunted, grabbing his spear again. The storm roared. More Wights came, as they always did, like waves that did not know how to stop. For a moment, Tormund felt the old dread rise. Hard home again, a tide of corpses rolling in. Then he caught a strange stillness at the edge of his perception. The stranger had turned his head slightly, as if listening to something beneath the scream of the wind. His eyes narrowed. He shifted 3 steps left, without seeming to think about it, and raised his sword. A Wight burst from the snow at that exact spot, having dragged itself along beneath the surface. Its hands reached for where his thigh had been. The blade came down, taking both arms at the elbows. He had moved before he could have seen it, before the snow had stirred. As if he knew where death would strike, by some sense Tormund did not possess. Another surge of Wights crashed against their line, then broke. Dragonglass glimmered. Valyrian steel sang. The dead fell in heaps, twitching, and for a brief, trembling second there were no more coming. "Fall back," Tormund bellowed, chest heaving. "Back to the rocks. Tighten up." The stranger stepped back with them, though his eyes stayed on the white horizon. His breath smoked in the air, but there was no tremor in his hands. "That was only a feeler," he said quietly, half to himself. "The Night King is pushing his scouts further along the coast than before." Tormund swallowed, the name bitter in his mouth. You talk like you know him, he said. I know what he was, the man replied. I know what he became, and I know what must be done. He wiped his sword clean on the hem of a dead man's cloak and slid it into its sheath. Snow had crusted in the lines of his face, but his eyes were clear. We go south, he said. Every heartbeat now is borrowed. By the time the last twitching limb lay still, Tormund's arms burned and his beard was crusted with frozen gore. He spat again, just to remind his mouth what living tasted like, and rolled his shoulder until it cracked. Could have used a dragon, he said. Burn the lot of them. Make it easy. There is no easy left, the stranger said. He stood among the dead as if among old friends, looking down at them with a tired sort of sorrow. Not pity exactly, recognition. Your people did well, he added. You fought them before. Too many times, Tormund said, and not enough seeing as how they're still walking. Some of the exiles had begun to move among the corpses, yanking dragonglass arrows from those that still had heads, stamping on skulls here and there. Their faces were drawn, skin stretched pale over cheekbones. Who are you? One of them called, a wiry man with a Dornish look to him. You never said your name. The silver-haired man exhaled, white fog hiding his expression for a moment. When it cleared, his gaze went north again, then south, as if measuring distances that could not be seen. It is not a name that brings much good with it, he said. Not anymore. Better that you think of me as a man with a sword and a debt. Debt to who? Tormund asked. To the world, the man said, and to my children. There was a quiet there, in that space between breaths, something fragile as glass. Tormund shifted his spear in his hand, uncomfortable. World never did much for me, he said. As for children, well, most of mine are dead, one way or another. Then you know why I cannot let more die if there is a chance to stop it, the man said softly. He reached once more for the harp, fingers brushing the wood as if drawing strength from the touch. I chased songs and secrets when I was young, he said, almost to himself. I thought prophecy was a riddle made for me to solve, that I might wear the answer like a crown. I was wrong. Prophecy is a plague. It infects everyone around the one who hears it. They die of it, and if he lives, he does so with their ghosts for company. Tormund snorted. Sounds like you've spent too much time with red witches. Perhaps, the stranger said, but he smiled, faint and crooked. Or perhaps I finally learned the cost of being wrong. He slung the harp back into place, snug against his spine. Jon Snow is at Winterfell, Tormund said, because the man's eyes, for all their distance, had a way of pulling answers from people. We ride for him now, for the battle to come. I know, the stranger said. I have seen him, on the battlements, in the snow. His face turned toward a storm he cannot hope to weather alone. You dreaming again? Tormund asked. I dream often, the man said. I see too much and often too late. This one I heed before it has time to ripen into regrets. He turned to his men. Mount up, he called. We ride with the free folk now. You follow Giantsbane's orders as you would mine. Any man who cannot abide that may stay here with the dead. There was some muttering, but no one chose the snow. They moved quickly. The Wights had come from inland. That meant the coast would be safer for a time, or at least less immediately deadly. Tormund set the pace, his people falling into their old patterns, flanking scouts and rear guards slipping away into the white. The exiles clustered together, still casting wary glances at the free folk, but necessity had already begun to wear down old habits. The stranger rode again at the head of his small knot of men, wrapped in his plain cloak, hair whipping free. The harp's neck rose over his shoulder like the spine of some small, fragile animal. He did not hum as some men did on the march. He rode in silence, as if listening. After an hour, when the wind dropped for the first time all day, Tormund drew his pony alongside the man's taller horse. You said children, he said without preamble. Plural. The stranger's jaw worked once. Yes, he said. One I never held. One I did. Dead? Tormund asked bluntly. Yes, the man said again, barely more than a breath, and yet not gone. Not entirely. It made no sense, but Tormund had walked with a man who had died and risen again. He had seen hedges of burning black obsidian swallowing white shadows. Sense was a thin blanket in a world this cold. World takes what it wants, he said gruffly. Sometimes it spits parts back out. Likes to keep us guessing. The stranger huffed a laugh. On that, at least we agree. They rode on. The sky lowered. Somewhere ahead, invisible beyond miles of snow and rock, the ruins of the wall lay like a broken spine, and beyond that, Winterfell waited. A black holdfast in a white land, full of wolves and dragons and men who had already died once. The man who had called himself no lord without a name tilted his head back and closed his eyes a moment, letting the cold slap his face. I am coming, my son, he thought, though he did not say it aloud. This time, I will not leave you to bleed alone. Winterfell dreamed while its people did not. Snow layered its towers and filled its courtyards, softening hard edges, muffling steps. Smoke curled from the great hall's chimneys, thin and gray, then disappeared into the sky. The hot springs steamed beneath stone floors, fighting a losing war against the cold that seeped in through every crack. In the Godswood, time had its own pace. The heart tree stood as it always had, red leaves whispering secrets even in winter, face carved with a mouth that never closed. The still black pool at its roots reflected branches, sky, and the boy beneath them. Bran Stark's eyes were white. Ravens wheeled high above the keep, their cries thin and sharp. Through 1,000 black wings, the world spread out before him. The smoking ruins of Last Hearth, its once proud tower now a broken tooth. The long white road between there and here, dotted with black specks that moved like ants. The shattered gap in the wall at Eastwatch, its shattered ice jutting like jagged knives toward a sky gone dark with storm. He saw the Night King's army as a shadow on the land, not yet at Winterfell's gates but closer than comfort could bear. A roaring absence in the world's song. Where it passed, fires went out. Where it lingered, sound died. He turned his sight further north, following a thread he had not known he sought until he felt it tugging at him. A thin, bright line of something. Not fire, not entirely, not the searing presence of dragons above the clouds, whose passage he had already marked more than once. This was smaller, human-shaped, and yet it burned against the white in a way that made the hairs on his arms prickle. Along the coast, he found them. A line of riders and walkers, a snake of dark bodies against snow. Among them moved the free folk he knew by face if not by name. Tormund Giantsbane rode at their head, laughing at something the wind stole before it reached Bran's borrowed ears. But it was the man beside him who caught Bran's attention and did not let go. Long silver hair whipped by the storm. A plain cloak over worn armor that might once have been finer. A sword at his side, its metal drinking the light. A harp on his back, the strings humming faintly in a wind that should not have carried sound so far. The man's face was older than in any vision Bran had seen of him. Lines fanned from the corners of his eyes, carved by years and regrets. A scar crossed one cheek, white against pale skin. But the eyes themselves, light, almost lilac, were the same, and they burned with a familiar, eerie intensity, as if they could see past the world into something beyond. Bran had seen that face in another place, in another time, standing on the banks of a river that ran red with blood. He had watched him fall, breastplate crushed beneath a warhammer's blow, rubies scattering from shattered mail like drops of fire. Rhaegar Targaryen. The name rose in his mind, as clear as if someone had spoken it aloud. Bran's breath shuddered in his chest, though his body in the Godswood hardly moved. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. That's not possible, whispered some old piece of the boy he had been. He died at the Trident. Father said so. Oldnan said so. The songs say. Songs lie. The three-eyed raven's memory replied, cool and indifferent. Men lie. The river took his armor and his rubies. The current took his body. Not all who fall in battle die. Rhaegar rode south in Bran's sight, talking quietly with Tormund, eyes flicking always toward the horizon. Bran slipped closer, through the eyes of a raven that circled above their column, feeling the beat of its wings as his own. "Have seen him," Rhaegar was saying, his voice thin in the wind, standing on Winterfell's walls. The snow was falling on his hair. His eyes were on a storm he could not see the edges of. "Jon Snow." Tormund's laugh boomed up. "Aye, that sounds like him. Always staring at something grim." Rhaegar's mouth curved, just for an instant. The expression made him look younger. Bran, watching through the raven's eyes, saw something raw in it. Longing, guilt. "He should never have had to carry this alone," Rhaegar murmured. "None of this was meant for him." Bran pulled back, suddenly dizzy. The raven spiraled upward, and the vision of Rhaegar and Tormund shrank to specks below. "Bran?" a voice said very softly, from somewhere close and far. He blinked, and the Godswood returned. The heart tree's carved eyes looked down at him, sap like dried blood at their corners. The pool lay dark and still. Snow dusted his hair. His own eyes were dark again. He turned his head. Arya Stark stood a few paces away, boots quiet on the dead leaves, her face a mask of wary patience. She had learned how to move without sound. She could not yet learn how to move without disturbing the air of a place. "You were gone," she said. "I called your name." "I know," Bran replied. His voice had grown soft and flat over the past year, like water worn smooth over stone. "I was watching." "Jon Snow?" she asked, because that was always the first question. "Yes," Bran said. "And someone else. Someone worse." Arya's hand brushed the hilt of needle at her hip, though what steel could do against the things Bran saw, neither of them could say. Bran considered his answer. He looked past her shoulder, to where the faint shapes of Winterfell's walls rose beyond the trees, and beyond that, to a sky full of ravens. "Not worse," he said at last. "Just older, and wrong." "Wrong how?" Arya stepped closer, her shadow crossing his lap. "Bran, we don't have time for riddles. The dead are coming. Sansa's counting grain like a baker, Jon Snow's drilling boys who still flinch at steel, and Daenerys Targaryen's dragons eat more than a whole house of Freys. If there's another threat..." "It isn't a threat," Bran said. "Not exactly." He met her gaze then, and for a moment there was something like the old Bran in his eyes. Fear wanned. The desire to share what he had seen. "Rhaegar Targaryen is riding with Tormund Giantsbane," he said. "He is coming here." For a heartbeat, Arya's face didn't change. Then her brows climbed just a fraction. "That's a poor joke," she said. "You've grown strange, Bran. But you never bothered with bad japes before." "I'm not joking," Bran said. "He's dead," she insisted. "Robert Baratheon killed him. It's the story that started all of this. Rhaegar stole Lyanna Stark, father rode south, they fought. Rhaegar died in a river of rubies, and everything else followed. That's how it goes." "Stories go as far as the men who tell them can see," Bran replied. "They don't see the river under the water. He should have died. Most of him did. Enough lived for the world to hurt him a little longer." Arya stared at him, jaw tight. The red leaves shifted above them, whispering. "So you're saying the man who stole our aunt is riding here now, with the wildlings?" Bran tilted his head. "He loved Lyanna Stark," he said. "As she loved him. I have seen them together." He watched the words strike her. Arya's hand clenched on Needle's hilt. "Even if that's true," she said, each syllable clipped, "it doesn't change what came after. Robert's rebellion, the burned castles, the shattered lives. Our parents, our brothers." "No," Bran said, "but it changes why Jon Snow is who he is." Arya flinched very slightly. "Jon Snow knows who he is," she said fiercely. "He's our brother." "He is," Bran agreed, "and he is also Rhaegar Targaryen's son." The words did not echo, but somehow the Godswood felt different after them. Colder, though the wind had not changed. Arya's lips parted. She fumbled for something to say, hands empty of anything but the sword. "That's not," she began, then bit it off. "Sansa should hear this. Jon Snow should hear this. From you." "Yes," Bran said. "He should." "Then why haven't you told him?" she demanded. "Because I was not sure what shape the river would take when it reached us," he thought. "Because every truth I speak changes the current, and I am not yet wise enough to know where every branch will lead." Aloud, he said only, "Because until this moment Rhaegar Targaryen was dead. Now he isn't. That changes everything." Arya took a step back, her eyes unreadable. She had learned from faces, and now she wore one that showed nothing at all. "You'll tell Sansa," she said. "We'll decide what to do about it." Bran inclined his head. "He will be here soon," he added. "We have little time." She turned and strode away through the trees, her cloak billowing behind her. Snow creaked under her boots. Bran watched her go, then let his eyes slip closed again. Rhaegar Targaryen rode south through his mind, over and over. Bran tasted cold water, heard the shriek of rubies flying from broken mail, saw another vision layered over the first. A girl on a bed of blood, hair damp with sweat, eyes fixed on a newborn in her arms. "Promise me, Ned," Lyanna Stark whispered, again and again. "Promise me." Bran's fingers curled on the wood of his chair. He opened his eyes and tilted his head back, looking up through the heart tree's branches. "Your secrets are old," he said quietly to the carved face. "But the world you're in is new. We'll see if you can bear another prince." The tree said nothing. It never did. But somewhere to the north, the ravens that shared Bran's sight wheeled and turned, as if called, and began to follow the moving line on the snow. Steel rang in the yard, muffled by snow. Jon Snow moved through the flurry of blades without thinking, Longclaw an extension of his arm. The greatsword's pale Valyrian steel flashed in quick, economical arcs. He parried one man's clumsy strike, pivoted, and brought the flat of his blade around to smack another on the shoulder. The blow staggered the man back into the snowbank, where he landed with a grunt and a curse. "Again," Jon said. The men, boys really, most of them, dragged themselves up, cheeks red from cold and humiliation both. They set their feet, lifted their swords. Jon could see the fear behind the determination in their eyes, and it tasted bitter on his tongue. He knew what they were thinking. Some of them had fought at the Wall. Some had been at Winterfell when Ramsay Bolton's hounds howled and the snow turned red. Others had only heard tales. The dead at Hardhome, the blue fire that had torn through Eastwatch, the column of corpses marching south. Stories were sharpened in the telling, but this time they were not sharp enough. "Keep your shield high," Jon said, gesturing to one lad whose helm sat crooked on his head. "If you lose your shield, you're already dead. The dead don't care if you're brave." "Aye, your grace," the boy muttered. "Your grace." The title still sat on Jon's shoulders like armor he'd never quite grown into. Heavy, ill-fitted, necessary. He lifted Longclaw in salute and stepped in again. The lads met him with a clatter of steel, grunting, slipping in the snow. Ghost watched from the edge of the yard, white as the ground around him save for his red eyes, which tracked Jon's every movement. After a while, Jon called a halt. Arms ached, breath burned. That was good. Better they feel it now than freeze up when blue eyes came at them in the dark. He dismissed the men and moved to the edge of the yard. Ghost padded to his side, pressing a cold nose into Jon's gloved hand. Jon scratched behind his ear. "You and me, Ghost," he murmured. "Always comes back to you and me. I and a few thousand others who'd like to stay breathing," Davos Seaworth said, stepping up beside him. "You're driving them hard." "Not hard enough," Jon said. He squinted up at the sky. Snow fell in slow, fat flakes now, drifting rather than slashing. It would clog the battlements and soak the cloaks of the men on watch. Dragons did not care about snow. Men did. "The dead don't tire," he added. "We have to be better than them in every way that matters." "That's a tall order, M-Lord," Davos said. "They don't eat," Don't sleep. Don't sit up nights wondering if they've made the right choices." Jon smiled thinly. "Then we'll beat them by having more regrets." Davos huffed. "If regret were steel, we'd have a wall yet." They stood in silence a moment, watching the yard. Men dispersed, heading for warmth and food. Above them, the ramparts were lined with watchers. Northern men, free folk, unsullied. A dragon's roar echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the walls, followed by the deep rush of wings. "You've got a look about you," Davos said quietly, "like a man who's felt the storm shift, but can't yet see the clouds." Jon glanced at him. The Onion Knight's gaze was steady, his face lined with more than years. "I feel watched," Jon admitted. "Not by the dead, by something else. As if a hand were moving pieces on a board, and I'm one of them." "That's because you are," Davos said. "You've got dragons, kings, queens, and dead men all eyeing you. You're the lad who got himself named king twice over. That'd make any man feel like a carved bit of wood." Jon shook his head. "It's not that. It's older, like a song half heard, coming from far away." Davos gave him a sideways look. "You've been spending too much time with Targaryens," he said. "They put strange notions in your head. Next thing you know, you'll be strumming harps and muttering about prophecies." Jon snorted, but the unease remained. He thought of Bran's eyes, dark and knowing, of Samwell Tarly's hands moving over old books, of Daenerys Targaryen's dragons wheeling high above the clouds. Threads all tied to him somehow. He had been dead once. He remembered the cold, the emptiness, Melisandre's whispered prayers. He did not think he had been brought back so he could stand by and watch the world burn or freeze. "Whatever's coming," he said, mostly to himself. "We meet it at Winterfell." "That we do," Davos said. "And we'll meet it together. Better than facing it alone." Ghost nudged Jon's hand again, as if in agreement. Jon scratched him once more, then turned his face up to the falling snow and tried to shake the feeling that somewhere, beyond the edge of what his eyes could see, someone else was also turning toward him. The wind on the battlements cut to the bone, but Sansa Stark did not flinch. She had learned long ago that the cold could be borne if you refused to show it that it had teeth. Below her, Winterfell's courtyards bustled despite the snow. Men moved in lines, hauling sacks of grain toward storerooms, stacking firewood, rolling barrels. Women and children passed between them, carrying baskets, leading goats, hurrying from one shelter to another. The chaos was ordered, mostly, but Sansa knew how fragile order could be. One spark of panic, one rumor misplaced, and the whole careful pattern would fray. She had counted the grain herself. She had walked every storeroom with a lantern, watching shadows creep along the walls. There was enough, if the battle was short and the dead did not linger. If the living did not multiply with every new group that arrived seeking refuge. Too many ifs. She watched a trio of unsullied cross the yard, their spears upright, helmets dusted with snow. Beyond them, a dragon's wings swept briefly into view over the outer wall, a flash of dark scale against white sky. Men stopped to gape. Sansa saw the mixture of awe and fear in their faces. Daenerys Targaryen had brought her armies and her dragons, as promised. She had set them here in the north to stand between the living and the dead. For that, Sansa was grateful. Gratitude did not erase distrust. Footsteps sounded on the stone behind her. She turned. Arya emerged from the stairwell, cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes sharper than the wind. "We need to speak," Arya said without preamble. Sansa's mouth tightened. "About what? The grain? The dragons? The queen who looks at our brother like he's both a lover and a threat." "About Rhaegar Targaryen," Arya said. The name hung between them like frost. Sansa's spine went stiff. "He's dead," she said. "Rhaegar Targaryen is dead, and good riddance. Father told me the story when I was a girl." "So did mine," Arya said. "But Bran says otherwise." At the mention of their brother, Sansa's hands tightened on the stone parapet. "Bran says many things," she said carefully. "Some of them true, some of them something else." He's sure of this, Arya said. Bran says Rhaegar Targaryen rides south with Tormund Giantsbane. That he's coming here. For a moment, the wind was the only sound. Even the distant murmur from the yard seemed to fall away. That's madness, Sansa said at last. Some trick of the enemy. The dead could wear his face, if they thought it would frighten us. The dead don't play songs, Arya said. Bran saw him, a harp on his back, a sword at his side. He moves like a man, not a corpse. And Bran mentioned something else. She stepped closer, lowering her voice despite the emptiness around them. He said Jon Snow is Rhaegar Targaryen's son. The world narrowed for Sansa, just for a heartbeat, to the feel of the rough stone under her hands and the sound of her own breath. It was not entirely unexpected. There had been hints, glances exchanged between Bran and Samwell, a certain weight to the way Jon and Daenerys stood near each other. But having the thought half-formed in the back of her mind was one thing. Hearing it spoken aloud, wrapped in their aunt's name and the memory of songs about stolen brides, was another. Lyanna, Sansa whispered, the name tasting like ash. Bran said, Jon Snow is Lyanna Stark's son, by Rhaegar Targaryen. Arya nodded. He said they loved each other, that she was no stolen maiden. Sansa's first instinct was anger, at Rhaegar for bringing ruin, at Lyanna for choosing love over duty and leaving the rest of them to pay the price. At Jon, though none of this was his fault. The old stories that had carried her through childhood cracked and shifted under the weight of new truths. Why didn't Bran tell us sooner? She demanded. He says the river changed, Arya said. That what was true when Rhaegar was dead is different now that he's not. That's not an answer, Sansa snapped. It's the one we have, Arya replied. We have to decide what to do. If this man is truly Jon Snow's father, and he walks into our hall, what then? Sansa turned back to the horizon. The land beyond Winterfell's walls was a smear of white and gray. Somewhere out there, if Bran was right, rode a ghost in flesh. A prince whose choices had shattered kingdoms. The man Robert Baratheon had hated so much he built a throne on his bones. If he walks into our hall, Sansa said slowly, he walks into the North's memory. They will remember what his name cost them. And Jon Snow? Arya asked. Jon Snow will have to choose which name he answers to, Sansa said. Her voice was steady now. And we will have to decide what that means for us. She looked down at the yard again, at the men drilling in the snow, at the dragons soaring above, at the banners snapping in the wind. Stark direwolf, Targaryen dragon, the flayed man of House Bolton was gone, but its ghost still hung over the broken kennels and the burned crosses outside the walls. The dead are coming, she said. We need every sword, even one with rubies in its history. If the dead don't get here first, Arya said. Bran thinks Rhaegar Targaryen rides fast. Then we should be ready when he arrives, Sansa said, with warmth and food and questions. The ruins of Eastwatch loomed out of the snow like the ribs of some fallen giant. Where once the wall had plunged straight into the sea, a seamless drop of ice hundreds of feet high, there was now only a jagged wound. Broken chunks of blue-white towered at twisted angles, their faces slick with frozen seawater. The sea itself gnawed at their base, gray and hungry. Tormund had seen the wall fall. He had watched the Night King raise a dead dragon and tear through ice that had stood for 8,000 years. The memory of that blue fire still woke him at night. Now, picking his way over the rubble, he spat at the edge of the breach. Never liked the bloody thing, he muttered. Still don't like how it came down. Rhaegar stepped carefully beside him, boots crunching on ice that bore strange scorch marks, thin black lines where dragonflame had licked and frozen again. The wall was never meant to be forever, he said. Nothing made by men is. Ice helps. It does not end the dark. You talk like you knew it, Tormund said. I knew stories, Rhaegar replied, of the first long night, of the children and the men who stood together, for a time, before forgetting they had ever done so. I spent years chasing those stories in old books when I should have been ruling or fighting or being a husband. His mouth twisted, bitter. Now the books have come alive again, he added. And they are uglier than even the maesters wrote them. They picked their way down to the path the Night King's army had carved through the rubble. Here, the ice had been ground flat by thousands of dead feet. It was slick and treacherous, but their horses knew their work. The column wound through the gap, emerging on the southern side of what had once been an impenetrable barrier. On this side, the world looked no kinder. Snow, rock, the faint dark smudge of the treeline farther inland. Some of the exiles turned to look back, faces pale. To leave the land beyond the wall was to step into a legend reversed. They had followed stories north once of monsters and magic. Now they were walking back into the tales the South told itself about dragons. South's no better than North, Tormund called back to them. More kneelers, fewer giants. That's all. Rhaegar's gaze lingered on the breach. His jaw clenched. When I was a boy, he said quietly, they told me the wall had stood since before there were Targaryens, that it would stand until the end of days. A comfort, they said. Something unchanging. That comfort's gone now, Tormund said. World keeps ending and ending, then getting back up. Rhaegar blew out a breath that might have been a laugh. You're wiser than some maesters I've known, he said. I've had more shit kicked at me, Tormund replied. Teaches you what matters. They rode on. The land sloped gently downward, the snow a little less deep, the wind a little less sharp. Still cut, but now it tasted faintly of smoke. Somewhere ahead, men burned fires that the dead had not yet found. As dusk crawled over the world, they made camp in the lee of a low hill, where a stand of dead trees broke the wind. Fires crackled to life. The free folk built theirs high and careless, as they always had, trusting their scouts more than secrecy. The exiles kept theirs low, glancing into the dark as if expecting southern lords to ride out of it and demand large sums of gold in penalties for the wood. Rhaegar sat a little apart, his back against a fallen log, the harp cradled in his lap. His sword lay within easy reach, propped against the wood. The fire cast his face in flickering gold, softening its harder lines. Snow melted in his hair and ran in thin rivulets down his neck, as if the weather itself could not quite bear to cling to him. He plucked the strings idly at first, testing their tune. Then his hands found a progression, almost without his will, and the beginnings of a song wound into the night. This one Tormund knew, or rather knew of. He had heard it hummed under the breath of kneelers on long marches, had listened to crows murmur it on cold nights at Castle Black. A song about a girl who danced with ghosts in halls that no longer stood. About lost princes and broken promises. Jenny of Oldstones. The way Rhaegar played it, though, it was less about Jenny and more about the ghosts. Each note lingered, heavy with the weight of things not said. The men around the fire fell quiet. Even the wind seemed to hush, just for a moment. Tormund settled himself across from the prince who would not name himself and listened. You played that before? He asked when the last note died. Rhaegar's fingers rested lightly on the strings. Often, he said. Once, I thought it held the key to the prophecy I chased. Now I think it is only a song about men who forget the price of their dreams. What prophecy? Tormund asked. You keep dangling words like that and not feeding a man's curiosity. Where I come from, that's a good way to lose a tooth. Rhaegar's mouth curved, tired. The prince that was promised, he said. Azor Ahai reborn. A hero to stand against the darkness with a flaming sword in his hand. I thought once that I was that prince. Later, I thought one of my sons must be. Seems to me the only promise princes keep is that they'll get people killed, Tormund said. Hero's just another word for a corpse someone misses. Rhaegar looked into the fire. You're not wrong, he said. But the dark is real, Giant's Bane. Whatever name men give it, something must stand against it. He lifted his gaze. The flames painted strange shadows in his pale eyes. I thought I would be the sword, he said. Instead, I was only the man who dropped it. Now the sword walks Winterfell's halls, calling himself Jon Snow, wearing another man's name because I thought lies would save him. Tormund blinked. You're saying you're... Rhaegar shook his head. Names later, he said. When there's time. He began to play again, finger as gentle on the strings. Tormund listened, eyes half closed, and in the music he heard things he could not have described if anyone had asked. The crash of a warhammer on steel, the hiss of rubies scattering in a river, a girl's scream cut off too soon, a newborn's first wet cry. The night pressed in. Somewhere far to the south, wolves howled. Somewhere farther north, the dead marched. Sleep came late to the camp. Men turned in their blankets, chasing warmth and ghosts. The fires burned low, embers winking like tired eyes. Snow fell in thin, hesitant flakes, as if the sky itself were wary of coming too close. Rhaegar set the harp aside at last. His fingers ached, his back ached. Age had its say, even with men who had once worn crowns in songs that never mentioned sore joints. He wrapped his cloak tighter around himself and lay back on the ground, using the bundled harp as a pillow. The stars were thin tonight, veiled by cloud, but he could see a few stubborn points of light. Once he had tried to read them, seeking patterns, omens. Now he only watched them burn. Shoulda brought a better blanket if you're going to keep chasing doom. Tormund's voice rumbled beside him. The big man had stretched out not far away, his bulk a small hill under his furs. Rhaegar huffed. I've slept in worse places, he said. On worse nights. Always a worse night ahead, Tormund said. That's how the world works. Rhaegar thought of the trident of dust and blood and the ring of steel, of Elia's soft hands, of Lyanna's wild eyes, of a tower full of screams and secrets, of years wandering Essos under false names, listening to red priests mutter over flames about shadows in the south and a prince in the north who had died and yet was not gone. There have been better nights too, he said. I'd like to see if there are any left after this. You plan to live through it then? Tormund asked. I plan for my son to, Rhaegar said. As for me, I accept that the river may take me properly this time, so long as it does not drag him down too. Silence settled. Tormund's breath was steady in the dark. Somewhere, a horse snorted and stamped. You keep talking about this son like he's a scrawny babe, Tormund said eventually. He's a man grown, fought battles, died once, came back, nearly knocked my head off with that sword of his more than once. I know, Rhaegar said. I have seen him, in fire and snow, in dreams, in the eyes of men who speak his name. He closed his eyes. Behind their lids, images flickered. Jon Snow on the wall, cloak snapping around him. Jon Snow in the crypts of Winterfell, face lit by candlelight as he stared at Lyanna's stone likeness. Jon Snow standing on a ship's deck, wind in his hair, eyes on a dragon wheeling overhead. When I was young, Rhaegar murmured, more to the night than to Tormund, I believed the gods had set a song in my mouth and in my hands, that I would be the one to sing it. Perhaps I was only meant to play the first notes and leave the rest for another. Your son, Tormund said. Yes, Rhaegar replied, if he will forgive me the mess I made of his first life. Tormund grunted. Jon Snow forgives too much, he said. That's one of his troubles. You might get that wish, Silverhead. The question is what you'll do with it. Rhaegar let the words sink into him. The fire popped. A coal shifted, sending up a brief shower of sparks. I will give him what I never had, he said finally. The truth, a choice, and whatever strength is left in these hands for the war to come. He folded his arms over his chest and let the dark come down. Sleep found him in pieces, dragging him through old memories and new visions. In one, he stood again on the trident, Robert's warhammer arcing toward him like a falling star. In another, he watched Jon Snow face a tall figure of ice and shadow, Longclaw burning with white fire in his hands. He woke once in the small hours, heart pounding, breath a cloud in the freezing air. The camp was still. The fires had burned low, but not out. Snow had dusted his cloak. Above, the clouds had thinned. More stars showed themselves. One, bright and stubborn, hung low over the southern horizon, toward where Winterfell lay. Rhaegar watched it for a long moment. "Wait for me," he murmured, to the star, to the boy, to the world itself. "This time, I come for you before the hammer falls." He closed his eyes again. Morning would see them break camp and ride on, toward a castle full of old sins and new hopes. Toward Jon Snow, who did not yet know that the man who had set his life on such a crooked path was riding toward him with a harp, a sword, and a heart full of ghosts. The snow fell, the dead marched, and far ahead, in the Godswood of Winterfell, Bran Stark watched the little moving line on the white world and waited. The horns sounded first, 3 low blasts that rolled across Winterfell's courtyards like distant thunder. Men paused in their work. Children froze where they stood. The sound had been drilled into them over weeks. Not the shrill call that meant a scouting party returned, nor the frantic, stuttering cry that would herald the dead at the gates. This was something in between, unknown. Jon Snow heard it in the yard and felt his heart seize. Ghost stiffened beside him, hackles rising. "Not the dead," Davos Seaworth said at once, reading the fear that flickered in the men's eyes. "The horns would be higher, faster. This is visitors." "In this weather?" Jon said, already moving toward the stairs to the ramparts. "From where?" He took the steps 2 at a time, boots slipping on the ice stone. Ghost bounded ahead, a white blur. Cold air slapped his face as he emerged onto the wall. Sansa Stark stood near the gatehouse already, cloak drawn tight, hair braided high in the northern style. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes were sharp, fixed on the road. "What is it?" Jon asked, stepping beside her. "Riders," Sansa said. Her breath smoked. "From the north. Tormund Giantsbane's banners, and others I don't know." Jon braced his hands on the parapet and peered into the white. At first he saw only snow, endless, shifting white, wind driving it in sheets. Then shapes coalesced. Horses, men, spears, a ragged line moving with purpose. Tormund's orange beard blazed like a coal at the head of the column. Jon's chest loosened a fraction. "He's alive," he breathed. "Thank the gods." "That's not all," Sansa said quietly. "Bran Stark says there is someone riding with him that we must be ready for." Jon glanced at her. "Who?" She held his gaze a moment, as if weighing how much to tell him here on the wall with half the castle watching. Snow clung to her lashes. "We'll speak in the hall," she said, "after they're inside." "Sansa." "Jon Snow." Her voice sharpened, cutting his protest. "The dead are not yet at our gates. We can give our allies warmth and food before we throw more truths on the fire." He clenched his jaw but nodded. She was right. There had been enough shocks in the past year to unseat kingdoms. Another could wait an hour. Below, the gate creaked as its great beams were drawn back. Unsullied moved with mechanical precision, chains rattling as the portcullis began to rise. Men on the walls leaned forward, hands on bows, eyes narrowed. "Easy," Jon called to them. "Bows down unless they turn on us." Beside him, Sansa's fingers tightened for a moment on the stone. Jon saw a flicker of something in her face that was not quite fear, not quite anger. Anticipation, perhaps, with a bitter edge. He had the sudden, absurd thought that he was watching a play begin, half the actors unaware of the script. Behind them, boots scraped on stone. Jon turned as Daenerys Targaryen stepped onto the ramparts, cloak swirling around her like a small storm. Her hair, braided in intricate Valyrian patterns, glinted pale in the gray light. 2 Dothraki blood riders flanked her, hands resting lightly on their araks. "Your horns woke half my unsullied," Daenerys said, eyes on the approaching column. "Is it the dead?" "Not yet," Jon said. "Tormund Giantsbane and the Free Folk, maybe others." He watched her face as she saw the riders break through the curtain of snow. Something in her posture shifted when her gaze snagged on the figure beside Tormund. Not the giant wildling, but the man whose silver hair caught the light even at this distance. For a heartbeat, Jon thought she might be seeing herself reflected on the road. A trick of the light, a pale echo. Then her brows drew together. Confusion, a flicker of recognition that made no sense. "Who is that?" she murmured. Jon opened his mouth, but Sansa was already answering, voice low. "If Bran Stark is right," she said, "that is Rhaegar Targaryen." Daenerys went still. Jon heard Davos swear softly under his breath. The wind rushed over the wall, pulling at cloaks and hair, as if trying to snatch the words away. No one moved. Even the guards forgot to pretend they weren't listening. "Rhaegar Targaryen is dead," Daenerys said, her tone flat with old certainty. "He died on the Trident. My brother Viserys told me that story 1,000 times." "Bran Stark says he lives," Sansa replied, "and that he rides to our gates now. I saw him," Bran's voice added, quiet and close. Jon started. He had not heard his brother come up the stairs. Bran's chair rolled to the parapet with a soft wooden creak, pushed by Podrick Payne. The boy's eyes were distant, pupils wide as if he still half saw the world through a raven's gaze. Daenerys turned to him slowly. There was something like pleading in her eyes and something like dread. "How?" she asked. "If what you say is true, how?" "He was meant to die," Bran said. "The river took his armor and his rubies. The songs took his death and made it a story. But the river gave him back, for a time. Men found him broken on the bank. They mended his flesh, but not his ghosts." Jon's mouth had gone dry. He stared down at the approaching man, at the way he rode, straight-backed and solemn, sword at his hip, a wrapped shape slung across his back that might be a harp. "This is madness," Jon said. "Madness is our family's speciality," Daenerys murmured, surprisingly bitter. She pulled her cloak tighter, as if the cold had suddenly found her through her furs. Below, the column reached the open gate. Tormund raised a hand in greeting, broad grin splitting his face as he rode under the portcullis. The silver-haired man beside him lifted his face to the walls, eyes searching. For an instant, Jon could have sworn those pale eyes met his, across the distance and the snow. Something like a cord pulled taut inside him, as if a note he had never known he was missing had just sounded. He stepped back from the wall, heart hammering. "I'll meet them in the yard," he said. "Whatever he is, whoever he is, he came here as an ally. We treat him as one, until we know otherwise." Daenerys hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be there," she said. Her voice was calm. Her fingers, Jon saw, trembled where they clutched her cloak. Sansa watched them both, eyes hooded. "The North will be watching too," she said softly. Every step. Jon forced his legs to move, descending the stairs with Ghost at his heels, Davos beside him. Behind, he heard the soft rumble as Bran's chair began its slow turn. Winterfell, which had seen kings and traitors and the fall of houses older than empires, braced itself for a ghost to walk through its gates. The courtyard swallowed the sound of hooves, snow packing under iron-shod feet with muffled crunches. Steam rose from horses' flanks. The smell of sweat and leather and old fear rode in with them, mingling with Winterfell's familiar sense of smoke and boiled grain. Tormund Giantsbane rode at the front, as he had in Bran's visions, his great frame nearly too big for the shaggy northern horse beneath him. He flung up a meaty arm when he saw Jon. "Jon Snow!" he bellowed, voice booming off the stone. "Still alive, are you? I was afraid I'd find you made of ice by now, sitting on your new chair of bones." Some of the tension in the yard bled away. Men laughed, nervous but grateful. Jon allowed himself a thin smile. "Takes more than snow to kill a snow," he called back. He stepped forward, Ghost pacing at his side, the direwolf's red eyes fixed on the riders. "You're late," Tormund snorted as he swung down from his saddle. "Stopped to kill a few dead men and listen to some sad songs," he said. "Figured you'd want both." He strode forward and crushed Jon in a hug that drove the breath from his lungs. Jon endured it, clapping the bigger man's back. "Good to see you," he murmured. "Better to see these walls still standing," Tormund replied, releasing him. though you've filled them with too many kneelers again." Jon let his gaze slide past Tormund then, to the man dismounting just behind him. He did it smoothly, despite the stiffness that came from long riding and older wounds. When his boots touched the snow, he stood still a moment, as if listening to the ground. His cloak was plain gray wool, crusted with frost. Under it, a glimpse of old armor, mail polished not to shine but to endure. The scabbard at his hip was worn, leather darkened by years of use. The wrapped shape of the harp rose over his shoulder. His hair, loose and long, was the unmistakable pale silver of Valyrian blood. Not the bright, almost white shade of Daenerys, but darker, threaded with a few strands gone gray. His face bore the marks of a life longer and harsher than the songs ever mentioned. A scar along one cheekbone, a faint crookedness to the nose, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. Those eyes were light, almost washed-out purple, ringed with a gray that made them seem both distant and sharply attentive. They took in the yard, the lines of Unsullied, the cluster of northern men, the dragon's distant shadows sweeping past the sky's edge. They lingered a heartbeat on Daenerys, and something in his face flinched, quickly smoothed. Then they came to Jon Snow. The world narrowed. For a second, Jon felt as if he had been knocked backward. No, as if something inside his chest had been pulled forward. The man's gaze held his, weighing, measuring, searching for a face it half remembered. Jon had seen that face before in drawings, in tapestries. A young prince with a harp at his feet and rubies at his throat, standing beside Lyanna Stark in stolen glances of memory. He had seen it in Bran's voice when his brother spoke of the Tower of Joy. He had even seen it, once, in the reflection of dragonfire on Daenerys' cheekbones. "Your Grace," the man said. The title sat strangely on Jon's shoulders, more than ever under this stranger's tongue. Jon cleared his throat. "We're all the same here," he said. "King, queen, lord, wildling. All the deads meet if we don't stand together. You've come a long way in bad weather. We're grateful for any sword that rides through our gates at this point." The ghost of a smile touched the man's mouth. "Then think of me as a man with a sword," he said. His voice was low, carrying easily in the stillness, with a faint music in its cadence that spoke of another tongue beneath the common. "And a debt." Jon inclined his head. "You have a name?" The man's eyes flicked briefly to the ramparts where Bran watched, to the stones of the keep, to the snow underfoot. When they returned to Jon, something had settled in them. "I have had many," he said quietly. "In bravos, in lists, in the disputed lands. Here, once, I had a name that brought more grief than good with it. I had thought to leave it buried with my armor in a river." He exhaled, the breath smoking in the cold. "But it seems the river was not done with me," he went on. "I am Rhaegar Targaryen." The words dropped into the courtyard like stones in still water. Ripples spread. Gasps, oaths, the creak of leather as hands tightened on sword hilts. Somewhere a horse stamped and tossed its head, as if spooked by the change in the air. Ghosts snarled, hackles high. Jon laid a calming hand on the direwolf's neck, but his own heart hammered as if it wanted to follow the sound of that name out of his chest. Behind him, Daenerys descended the stairs, each step measured. Unsullied shifted as she passed, spears tilting. Sansa stayed higher on the flight, watching with a face carved in ice. Rhaegar turned toward Daenerys. For the first time, his composure cracked. His shoulders dipped, just slightly. "Daenerys," he said. No titles. The bare name as if he tasted it for the first time. She stopped a few paces away. The dragon pin at her shoulder gleamed. Her eyes, a clearer violet than his, searched his face with something like hunger and terror tangled together. "You can't be him," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Rhaegar Targaryen died before I was born." "Yes," he said. "I did, or I should have. I have been dying by inches ever since." He dropped to one knee in the snow. The motion was fluid, not feigned. He bowed his head. "I am sorry, Daenerys," he said, "for leaving you to carry alone what should have been mine." For leaving you with a madman's legacy and a usurper's throne. For not being there when you needed more than stories of a dead prince. The yard held its breath. Even the dragon's distant cries faded for a moment, as if the world itself strained to hear her answer. Daenerys looked down at him, jaw clenched, so tight Jon could see the muscle jump. Snow caught in her hair, a scatter of white in silver. I had a brother, she said slowly. Viserys Targaryen. He told me you were the last dragon, that you loved to sing, that you were gentle, that you died fighting for the woman you loved. She swallowed. Then he tried to sell me for an army, she went on. He beat me when I looked at him the wrong way. He died screaming with molten gold on his head, and the only thing I felt was relief. Rhaegar's face tightened, as if each word were a blow. I have heard some of what he became, he said softly. I am sorry for that too. Daenerys' eyes flashed. Sorry? She repeated, tasting the word like something sour. The men who killed my father were sorry. The men who hunted us across the sea. The ones who spat at us, who called us beggar king and whore queen. Sorry does not bring back years spent starving in exile. No, Rhaegar said. He raised his head then, meeting her gaze honestly. But I did not come to ask your forgiveness, Daenerys. I came because there is a war coming that will not care whose father failed whom. I came because my mistakes helped set it in motion, and I would not have my children die for them if there is any other path. His eyes flicked, almost imperceptibly, to Jon. Jon felt the world tilt. Children. I think this conversation belongs in the hall, Sansa said suddenly, voice cutting through the stunned silence with the pragmatism of someone who had lived through too many family dramas in public. With fires lit and wine poured, the whole North is watching. We should decide what we believe with full bellies, if nothing else. The spell broke. Men shifted. Someone laughed, strained and too loud. The tension in the yard loosened by increments. Jon found his voice. Winterfell offers you shelter, Prince Rhaegar, he said. The title tasted strange, but he gave it. For as long as you stand against the dead, we can speak of blood and crowns once we've made sure there's a world left for either. Rhaegar rose slowly, Snow clinging to his knees. He inclined his head to Jon, then to Sansa and Daenerys. Fair, he said. For once. Tormund clapped Jon's shoulder. Told you he plays sad songs, he said. Now let's get some meat in us before we all freeze. Jon managed a breath that might, on a kinder day, have been a laugh. He gestured toward the great hall. Come, he said. We'll talk where the wind has to knock first. Ghost padded at his side as they moved, Rhaegar walking just behind. Jon could feel the man's presence like a second heartbeat at his back. The dead marched somewhere out there. For the moment, Winterfell's ghosts had come home first. The Great Hall of Winterfell had seen stranger gatherings in the past 2 years, but not many. The Stark direwolf and the Targaryen dragon hung side by side above the dais, banners stirring in the drafts. Fires roared in the long hearths, spitting sap and sparks, but the warmth seemed to linger just out of reach of the men and women at the tables. Jon sat near the center between Daenerys Targaryen and Sansa Stark, the weight of their gazes a different kind of armor. Ghost lay at his feet like a banked snowdrift, eyes half closed, ears pricked. Beyond them, at the far end of the high table, Bran sat in his chair, eyes dark and unreadable, hands folded in his lap. Opposite, at a place of honor but not at the head, Rhaegar Targaryen sat with his back to the fire, so his face was lit from behind. It made a shadow of him outlined in gold. The harp rested against the bench beside him, within easy reach. His sword lay across his knees, scabbard wrapped in his hand. Tormund Giantsbane drank like a man trying to empty the barrels by himself. Davos Seaworth watched everything with the wary patience of a smuggler at a lord's feast. Tyrion Lannister rolled wine in his cup, eyes bright and sharp, taking in every twitch and word. The northern lords filled the hall with their silence. Lyanna Mormont glared from her place as if she could kill Rhaegar by will alone, the weight of all House Mormont's dead behind her stare. Lord Glover scowled. The Karstark boy looked like he'd been slapped. "This is no time to dredge up old wars," Jon began, when the scraping of trenchers and clink of cups had died down. "We are here because the dead march toward us. Whatever grudges we hold against each other, whatever names we hate, will not matter if we're all corpses." "But names do matter," Sansa said, her voice cool. "Names are how men choose which side of a battle line to stand on. The North bled for the name Targaryen once. It bled for the name Baratheon. It bled for the name Bolton. Now it bleeds for the name Stark again. And you ask it to bleed for the name Targaryen once more." Her gaze flicked briefly to Daenerys, then to Rhaegar. "The North bleeds for the living," Jon said, "whatever names they carry." "The living who put us on those battlefields had names too," Tyrion remarked, mild and knife-edged, "and made choices with them." Rhaegar lifted his cup, then set it down without drinking. "If you seek to weigh my sins tonight, Lady Sansa," he said quietly, "you'll find the scales break under them long before you reach the bottom. I did not come to ask the North for absolution, only for a chance to mend what I helped break." "You helped break this?" Lyanna Mormont demanded, voice sharp as a slap. "You and your pretty songs?" "Lady Lyanna," Jon said warningly, but Rhaegar raised a hand. "Let her speak," he said. "She bears the name of someone to whom I owe more than I can repay. She has a right to be heard." Lyanna's jaw clenched at the acknowledgement of her name's weight, but she didn't back down. "My men died fighting for King Robb Stark," she said. "His war began because your father burned his father and brother alive, and because you ran off with his betrothed." "I did," Rhaegar said. He did not flinch from the words. "I left King's Landing when my father needed a son at his side. I left my wife and our children in the hands of a madman because I thought I could fix the world with a prophecy and a stolen bride. I believed the gods had set me a riddle to solve. I was a fool." The hall shifted, unmoored. It was one thing to hate a man from afar, an idea, a story. It was another to have him sit in front of you and call himself by the same names your curses used. "Why now?" Daenerys asked. Her voice was calm in the way a sea could be moments before it broke ships. "You have been alive somewhere all these years, while I was starved and hunted and sold, while Viserys raved about crowns, while Robert Baratheon sat on your father's throne. Why come now?" Rhaegar looked at her as if the question had lodged in him long ago and never left. "Because I only learned recently that my mistakes had borne a son who lived," he said. "I believed the child Lyanna carried died with her. That was easier in a way. One less life weighed down by my choices." Bran's chair creaked softly. Heads turned. "The child did not die," Bran said. His voice floated over the hall, soft and clear. "Ned Stark took him from the Tower of Joy. He carried him north, past the trident where your rubies fell, past Lord Tywin's banners, past Robert Baratheon's hatred. He brought him here and named him his own." I swung to Jon. His stomach twisted. The air seemed to thicken, hot despite the cold. He had known something like this was coming ever since Bran had looked at him in the Godswood with that gaze old as winter. Samwell's words, half-whispered over an old maester's record, echoed in his head. Aegon Targaryen, legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. "Jon Snow is my cousin," Sansa said quietly. "Not my brother. I know that now, but he is still the man who was raised in this hall, by my father's hand." "He is more than that," Bran said. His eyes were on Rhaegar now. "He is your son. Yours and Lyanna Stark's, married in a secret ceremony at the Isle of Faces. The Septon wrote it in his book. Samwell Tarly read it. I saw it." Rhaegar bowed his head. The candlelight caught in his hair. His hands were clenched on his knees, knuckles white. "I knew he was mine," he said. "Not who he was, not what name he bore, only that there was a boy somewhere in the north who had died and returned. A boy the dead king beyond the wall turned his eyes upon. I followed scraps and whispers. Red priests spoke of him in their fires. A man in Bravos told me of a bastard who rose to command men in black. then raised wildlings and lords alike. When word reached me that Jon Snow had bent the knee to a dragon queen and sailed for Winterfell, I knew at last where my son had gone. He raised his head slowly and looked at Jon. I have had years to imagine this moment, he said. None of them were like this. Jon's throat felt tight. He wanted to laugh, to rage, to walk out into the snow and keep walking until his feet gave way. He wanted to be 10 again, listening at doors while Eddard Stark's voice hummed on the other side, telling stories of a girl with a wolf's blood and a boy with rubies at his throat. He wanted none of this to be true. I grew up in this hall, he said. As a bastard, I was told my mother was some woman father met on campaign. I waited years to hear her name and never did. I died for the Night's Watch. I came back. I've bled for the North, for the living, for Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons. Now you stand here and tell me that the man who started this war is my father and that I'm... He couldn't force the words out. King, Prince, they clogged his tongue. Daenerys watched him, face unreadable. You are Aegon Targaryen, Rhaegar said softly. Named for the Conqueror, my son, Lyanna's son. A murmur ran through the hall, like a wave against rock. Jon shook his head. I'm Jon Snow, he said. I always have been. Whatever blood runs in my veins. I swore an oath to the living. I won't let new names turn us into enemies while the dead are less than a week's march away. The dead don't care whose son you are, Davos said quietly. But they seem to care about you, lad. They follow you like a dog on a scent. Because he has my blood, Rhaegar said. Because I touched things I should not have, poked at prophecies and woke old shadows. The Night King feels him the way I felt him. He shivered, unconsciously, as if remembering a cold that went beyond weather. We can argue about names and crowns until we're blue in the face and the dead match us, Tyrion said. Or we can accept that this unfortunate tangle of parentage may be the one advantage we have. He gestured with his cup toward Rhaegar and Jon. We have 2 men here bound to this war by more than duty, he went on. By blood, by prophecy, by whatever it is red priests and three-eyed ravens see when they stare into fires and trees. If the Night King is drawn to them, perhaps we can use that. Jon met Rhaegar's eyes and, for the first time, saw not just the weight of old crimes there, but something else, a mirror of his own exhaustion. We can talk of traps and bait later, Sansa said. For now, we know what he is and who you are. That's enough for one night. Her voice shook, just once on the last word. She masked it quickly, but not before Jon heard. He closed his eyes briefly. I'm still Jon Snow, he said again, more to himself than the hall. Whatever else I am, I'm still me. Rhaegar watched him as if listening to a song only Jon could hear. The hall emptied slowly, like a wound draining. Men drifted away in clumps, voices low, glancing over shoulders. Some looked at Jon with something like awe, others with resentment, more with confusion. None of it mattered as much as the cold stone that waited beneath the castle. Jon went down to the crypts as he had gone 100 times before, feet finding the steps without thought, the air growing colder with each level. Ghost did not follow. The direwolf didn't like it down here. Jon understood. The weight of the dead pressed differently underground. Candlelight flickered on stone faces. Old kings and queens of Winterfell watched him pass, their stone direwolves at their feet. Eddard Stark's statue stood among them now, sword in hand, face carved in familiar lines. Jon paused there only a moment, letting his fingers brush the edge of the stone blade. You might have told me, he murmured. The statue said nothing. Lyanna Stark waited further in, where the older dead lay. Her statue was younger than some, older than others, her stone hair falling around her shoulders, her features carved in a way that made her look both fierce and strangely soft. She held no sword, only a hand on the hilt of one that lay across her lap, half drawn. Jon had stood here before, trying to see himself in that stone face. Tonight, the resemblance was harder to ignore. You died for me, he said quietly. eyes on the line of her jaw. Or because of me. Everyone keeps saying it matters whose son I am, but you never got a say in any of this, did you? Footsteps whispered behind him, soft and careful. Jon turned. Rhaegar Targaryen stood at the edge of the candlelight, cloak open, hair damp from melted snow. He moved with the automatic care of a man who had walked in too many tombs. "I asked Bran Stark to tell me when you came here," he said. His voice echoed, faint, off the stone. "Of course you did," Jon said. He didn't have the energy for politeness. "Everyone seems to know where I am before I do these days." Samwell Tarly hovered just behind Rhaegar, holding a lantern in both hands, look of apology plastered across his face. "I'm sorry, Jon," he said. "I thought, well, if there was going to be a talk, maybe it should happen here, not in front of half the North." Bran's chair creaked, wheels clicking on stone as Podrick guided him into the pool of light. His eyes were distant again, as if some part of him stayed above ground, watching other things. "You all seem to know what should happen," Jon said tiredly. "Why don't you tell me?" Silence settled. The candles sputtered. Rhaegar stepped closer to Lyanna's statue. His hand rose, fingers hovering inches from the stone cheek, not quite touching. "She laughed when the sculptor showed her the first sketch," he said. "Said she looked too tame. Too much like the southern ladies who spent more time in gardens than on horseback. She made him carve a scar here." He touched his own eyebrow. "She said a wolf should show her teeth." Jon swallowed. It was a small thing, and yet it made the woman in stone feel more real than any story had. "You married her," Jon said, "while you had a wife already." "Yes," Rhaegar said. "I broke my vows. I broke Elaya's heart. I endangered her and our children. I told myself it was for the world's sake. That the song I chased needed a Stark's blood and a dragon's. That Lyanna and I together would bring forth the prince that was promised." He looked at Jon, eyes shrouded. "I did terrible things for that idea," he went on. "I thought the gods demanded it. They did not. They were silent. The choices were only mine, and I chose poorly." "Does it change anything?" Jon asked. "That you loved her, that she loved you, people still died." "It changes what you are," Bran said. "Not a bastard. Not in truth. You were born of a lawful union, Jon. A son of both Stark and Targaryen, with a stronger claim to the Iron Throne than Daenerys Targaryen or Cersei Lannister." Jon barked a small, humorless laugh. It bounced off the crypt walls, sounding strange. "A claim to a chair of swords in a city I've never seen," he said. "While the dead march here, what good is that to anyone now?" "It might matter after," Samwell said softly. "If there is an after." Jon shook his head. "If we survive this, someone else can sit on that throne. I've had my fill of crowns and titles. They cost too much." Rhaegar studied him. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought a crown was a key. To prophecy, to purpose, to the love of the people. I wrapped myself in it gladly, never thinking that it would also be a weight around my neck. You have worn that weight without asking for it. Perhaps that is why you see more clearly than I did." He moved to stand beside Jon, facing Lyanna's statue. "She was fierce," he said, "and so very young. Younger than you when all this began. I thought I could protect her from the worst of it. I was wrong. I left her in that tower, thinking I would return with a new world for our child. I died instead. She died calling for your uncle, because he was there when I was not." His voice cracked, just once. "I do not ask you to forgive me, Jon," he said. "I would not in your place. I ask only that you let my mistakes be useful now. My blood in your veins draws the Night King's eye. My name gives you a claim that might keep the Southern Lords from tearing each other apart if we win. My sword and my life are yours to spend in this war." Jon stared at Lyanna's stone face, at the curve of her mouth, the hint of defiance in the set of her shoulders. "You say you're my father," he said, "but Ned Stark raised me. He taught me what honor was and what it cost. He is the man I've been trying to live up to since I was old enough to pick up a sword." Rhaegar nodded. "He did what I should have done," he said. "He took responsibility for a child he did not make. He protected you even when the world would have named him traitor for it. I'm grateful to him, and I envy him." He hesitated, then placed his hand flat on the cold stone of Lyanna's arm. "If you can spare hatred for me," he said quietly, "save some for the man I was, not the one who stands here now. I have had years to learn what a fool I was, and I have had years to learn what it is to live without a father worth the name myself." Jon didn't look at him. He couldn't. Not yet. "I don't know what to feel," he admitted. "Angry, relieved, lost." "Feel what you feel," Bran said. "The river doesn't ask if it should run. It simply does. What matters is what you do with where it takes you." Sam shifted awkwardly, the lantern swinging. "Whatever your name, Jon," he said, "you're still the man who saved my life on the wall, who brought the wildlings through the gate, who faced the dead at Hardhome. That's the man we need now." Jon let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding, came out in a white plume. "I won't be your prince that was promised," he said to Rhaegar. "I won't be your prophecy. I'll fight the dead because someone has to, not because some fire said my name." Rhaegar's shoulders eased. "Good," he said. "We have had enough prince's promise to break the world." They stood together in the crypt's dim light, separated by more than a few feet of stone and air, united by a woman who had died for both of them and a war that might yet kill them. Above their heads, snow fell on Winterfell, muffling the sounds of men sharpening steel. Daenerys Targaryen's solar in Winterfell was smaller than the chambers she had occupied in Meereen or Dragonstone, but it had a hearth that drew the cold from the bones and a narrow window that framed the falling snow. She stood at that window now, one hand resting on the stone, watching flakes chase each other past the glass. Her breath fogged the pain. Beyond, the courtyard lay in gray shadow, torches marking paths like scattered stars. Somewhere out there, her dragons coiled near the kennels, uneasy with the press of stone and people. "You look like you want to climb out onto the roof and fly away," Tyrion Lannister observed from his seat near the fire. "Tempting," Daenerys said, "but I am tired of running." Behind her, Rhaegar Targaryen warmed his hands over the flames, as if he could chase years of cold from his fingers in one night. The harp lay against the chair, strings catching the firelight. "I can come back later," Tyrion offered, glancing between them. "No," Daenerys said. "Stay. I have had enough of secrets spoken in private. If there is to be talk of my family, let there be a witness who remembers what we have done." She turned from the window, cloak whispering on the stone floor. Her eyes went to Rhaegar and stayed there. "In Pentos," she said, "Illyrio Mopatis told my brother Viserys that you were the last dragon, that when you died, the magic went out of the world. He said we were living in the ashes of your song." Rhaegar's mouth tightened. "Illyrio always liked his stories," he said. "Viserys said you left us a legacy," Daenerys went on. "A right to a throne, a duty to reclaim it. But he also said you left us to starve in the alleys of Braavos while Robert Baratheon hunted us. That you died for a woman who was not our mother. That your foolishness killed Elia of Dorne and her children." Her voice did not rise, but each word struck like a measured blow. "Which part of that legacy do you claim, Rhaegar Targaryen?" she asked. "All of it," he said. There was no hesitation. "The right, the duty, the foolishness, the deaths. I will not let your brother's lies and half-truths take the blame that is mine." He met her gaze. Tyrion watched them both with hooded eyes, fingers lightly circling the rim of his cup. "I loved Elia," Rhaegar said. "Not as I should have, not as she deserved. She was gentle and clever and kinder than I was. I married her for duty and grew to love her in quiet ways. I loved Lyanna differently, fiercely, as if the gods had set fire to my veins and told me it was destiny." He shook his head, a small, harsh motion. "Destiny is a word men use when they want to excuse what they already wanted to do," he said. "I wanted Lyanna. I wanted the prophecy to be about me. I wrapped them together and told myself it was the will of the gods. And the cost? Daenerys asked. Did you count it? Not well enough, he said. He looked older than in the firelight. Not in his face, but in the way he held himself, as if his spine carried more years than his bones. I have lived with that cost since the day I woke on a muddy riverbank and realized the world had gone on without me, he said. I learned of Elia and the children in a tavern, from a man who grinned as he mimed smashing a baby against a wall. I learned of my father's end when a hedge knight described the way he begged for mercy with wildfire licking his robes. I learned of you, slowly, a girl in exile, a dragon hatched in the ashes of a pyre, a queen who was freeing slaves while I hid in foreign alleys. Daenerys's throat worked. You knew I lived, she said, and still you did not come. I thought I would break what you were building, he said simply. Everywhere I go, my name drags the past with it. Mad King, stolen bride, dead children. You were making a new world. I was afraid that if I stepped into it, I would bring the old one crashing down on your head. You did that anyway, Tyrion observed. Rhaegar inclined his head. Apparently, I do not get to choose how my ghosts walk. Daenerys laughed, brittle. When Drogo died, when my son died, she said, voice quiet. All I had left were the stories told about you and my father. One a madman, one a prince in shining armor. I burned the first away when I watched men die screaming in the fighting pits of Meereen for a mad queen's entertainment. I have been trying to burn the second ever since I saw what chasing a throne cost. Her eyes glinted with unshed tears. I did not need a father then, she said. I needed a future. I made one for myself. With dragons, with blood, with fire. And you did it better than I ever did, Rhaegar said. There was no envy in his tone, only a kind of awe. You freed slaves, he went on. You took cities without burning them when you could. You listened when men who had spent their lives on the wrong side of history told you hard truths. Whatever else you are, Daenerys, you are not your father's daughter in the ways that mattered most. That's not what the lords of Westeros will see, she said. They will see only that I am Aerys Targaryen's blood, that I have dragons at my back, that now there is another Targaryen with a stronger claim than mine, because you loved a northern girl in secret. Rhaegar flinched. If my name weakens yours, he said, I will cast it aside again. If the world needs a queen to rebuild it, it should be you, not the son of a woman who never wanted a crown. Daenerys looked at him as if he had grown another head. You would yield a throne you have never sat on for a daughter you never held, she said slowly. Just like that. Yes, he said. I have sat too long on a throne of my own mistakes. I have no hunger left for another. Tyrion shifted, interest sharpening. Most men who claim blood right to a throne would still fight over its bones, he said. You lay yours down like an unwanted cloak. I wore it once, Rhaegar said. In my mind, in songs. It did not fit. Jon Snow wears every crown as if it were a chain. You look at it as if it were a tool to break chains. If the world must have a Targaryen to follow when this is over, better it be one who learned power by freeing men than by playing at prophecy in a library. Daenerys studied him as if trying to find the lie. When she didn't, something in her shoulders eased, just a fraction. You say Jon Snow is your son, she said. That he is my nephew, that he has a better claim than I do. He doesn't want it. But the people might. They might rally to a man who rose from the north rather than a woman from the far side of the world. They might, Rhaegar agreed. Daenerys turned her gaze back to the window. I won't burn him, she said quietly. Whatever else happens, I have burned enough men who stood in my way. I will not add my own blood to that pyre. Rhaegar bowed his head. Then you are already a better ruler than many who sat the Iron Throne, he said. Tyrion finished his wine and set the cup down. I find myself unexpectedly optimistic, he said, which usually means I've missed some looming disaster. But for the moment we have 3 Targaryens under one roof, and none of them are actively trying to kill each other. That's more than I would have wagered 2 days ago. Daenerys's lips twitched despite herself. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she said. "Tomorrow, we plan how to keep the dead from killing us instead." The war room smelled of wax and smoke and damp wool. A map of the north lay unrolled on the table, corners pinned by knives. Small carved wolves marked northern forces. Tiny spears for the free folk. 3 dragon figurines for Daenerys's children, their paint scorched at the edges by overzealous hands. Jon stood at the head of the table, knuckles white on the wood. To his right, Daenerys studied the map with a commander's eye. To his left, Sansa watched the men more than the parchment. Rhaegar stood slightly back, near Bran's chair, as if wary of taking a central place again. "The dead have taken last hearth," Jon said, touching the map where the Umber's seat was marked. "They left us a message there. They're not bothering with subtlety now. They'll march straight here." "How long?" Sansa asked. 2-3 days if the weather holds," Davos said. "Less if it doesn't. They don't slow for snow." "We can't meet them in the open field," Tyrion said. "Our advantage is the walls and the dragons." "The dragons are not invincible," Daenerys said. Viserion fell. The Night King's spear moved faster than any arrow I've ever seen. If he can do that again. Rhaegar's gaze had drifted to the window, where only gray light showed. He seemed to be listening to something beneath the conversation, like the hum of a distant harp. "He can," Bran said, answering the unspoken fear. "He has the weapon still, but he is not the same as he was at the wall." "What does that mean?" Jon asked. "He is curious," Bran said. "Before, he moved with one purpose, to erase the living. Now he feels something he has not felt since he was a man. Interest. Recognition." Rhaegar's jaw tightened. "He feels me," he said. "My blood. My interference." Bran nodded. "He remembers when you first brushed against him in your dreams," he said. "When you looked too closely at the wrong pages. When you asked the wrong questions of the wrong gods. The river changed when you put your hands in it. He does not like that." "You're telling me the Night King has a grudge," Tyrion said. "Wonderful. It means we might know where he will strike," Jon said slowly. "Not just that he's coming here, but where he'll focus his attack." "On you," Davos said. "And on him." He nodded toward Rhaegar. "It's what you suggested in the hall," Sansa said, drawing herself up. "Use them as bait." The word hung, ugly and necessary. "I won't ask my son to stand in front of that army," Rhaegar said at once. "I won't ask a man who has already died once to do it again," Daenerys added, almost on top of his words. Jon looked between them, something hard and stubborn settling in his gut. "You don't get to decide that," he said. "Neither of you. I chose to come back from death. I chose to bend the knee. I chose to bring the free folk through the wall. I'll choose whether I stand in front of the Night King." "Jon Snow," Sansa said, warning in her tone. He met her gaze. "If the Night King is drawn to me," he said, "then hiding in the crypts won't stop him. He'll tear this castle apart stone by stone until he finds me. Better we choose the ground." Rhaegar's hand was tight on the back of Bran's chair. "He will come for me first," he said. "I am the older sin. You are only the echo." "You're the one who's walked with him in dreams," Jon replied. "I'm the one he's tried to kill on the wall at Hardhome, in that cursed cave on the island. We're both lanterns in the dark to him." Bran's eyes had gone distant again, pupils swallowing the color. "Careful," Tyrion murmured. "He's wandering." Bran blinked slowly and refocused. "I saw the Night King on a hill of dead men," he said. He looked south, and there were 2 figures in his sight, one standing on Winterfell's walls, one on its Godswood. He raised his hand, and the dead surged toward them both. "That settles it then," Davos said grimly. "He'll split his forces, try to take the walls and the heart of the castle at once. Then we make it seem like that's exactly what we want," Tyrion said. He moved a dragon figurine and a wolf, flanking one another on the map near the Godswood. "The Night King expects us to cling to our walls, to hide our most valuable pieces deep inside the board. He went on. Instead, we put them where he can see them, but on our terms. Jon Snow and Rhaegar Targaryen in the Godswood, near the Heart Tree. Bran there as well. We fill that place with dragonglass and fire. We make it the most dangerous patch of ground in the north for him. We let his nature do the rest. You're talking about using my brother and... Sansa flinched just slightly. And this man as bait. Yes, Tyrion said. And if it makes you feel any better, I think they'll insist on it even if we forbid it. He wasn't wrong. Jon could feel his own resolve hardening like ice in deep cold. Rhaegar, beside Bran, stood straighter, as if a melody he recognized had begun. We'll need the dragons overhead, Jon said. If the Night King shows himself in the Godswood, Daenerys, you must be ready. Daenerys nodded slowly. I will be, she said, but I won't leave the walls undefended. One dragon at the Godswood. One over the main gate. We can't risk losing both to another spear. Rhaegar's eyes flicked to the dragon figurines. I have never ridden one, he said. In my youth, I dreamed of it. Fantasies of a boy who thought he was born for songs. I thought it meant I was meant to conquer. Now I see it was only the world telling me dragons would return in another way. You won't start now, Daenerys said. Dragon riding is not something we have time to experiment with. Shame, Tormund said from the doorway, where he had been leaning, listening. I'd pay to see a silver head fall off a dragon's back. He strode in, snow still clinging to his beard. You keep talking about plans, he said. That's good. Plans are better than dying surprised. But plans break. When they do, you need men who can hit hard where T matters. He stabbed a thick finger at the map, at the space between the Godswood and the main gate. You put the free folk here, he said. We're used to fighting in the trees and the dark. When the dead push on the walls or the Godswood, we hit their flanks. Make them turn. They don't like turning. They don't like dragonglass either, Jon said. We have enough to arm most of the front lines. We put every blade we have where it can cut. Sansa watched the figures move on the parchment. Wolves and dragons and tiny spears. Pieces in a game where the losing side did not get to walk away from the table. This all assumes the Night King will behave as you expect, she said. That he will see bait and take it. That he won't simply sweep around and bury us in corpses on some other slope. He is not just ice, Bran said. He was a man once. Men are prideful. He has seen us stand against him and survive. He will want to break the ones who defied him most. His gaze went to Jon, to Rhaegar, to himself. He will come, Bran said. The only question is when. Then we make sure that when he does, we're ready, Jon said. The war table crowded with shadows. Long, thin, overlapping. For a moment, as the candles guttered, it felt as if they were already ghosts planning a battle for the living. Far to the north, where the snow lay deeper and the air itself seemed frozen mid-breath, the Night King stood on a ridge and watched the world. Below him, the army of the dead moved in a slow, relentless tide. They did not tire. They did not speak. They did not question. They only walked, feet crunching on snow, weapons gripped in hands that no longer felt cold. Giants lumbered among them, gray and immense, eyes burning blue. Dead horses plodded on, breathless, hoofs sinking into drifts. Around the Night King, his lieutenants waited in silence. White walkers with faces carved from ice, armor that looked like frost grown into plates, spears of solid, shimmering cold. Their eyes glowed the same unnatural blue, but none as intensely as their masters. He looked south. He did not see as men saw. Distance and weather meant little. The storm that walked with him carried whispers of what lay ahead. Through that blizzard of sensation, he felt something new. A pulse, a double beat. He had felt it once before, long ago, when he was still partly flesh and thought his own thoughts. A warmth that had walked into the wrong grove, reading words carved by hands older than men. A mind that had reached where it should not, touched the edge of the cold and recoiled. He had marked it then with fingers like knives, leaving a brand that burned even now. Now that same pulse echoed again. Not from the grove where he had first stood chained to the weirwood's roots, but from a different tree farther south. A tree with a face carved as a man's, standing in a garden of snow. Two lights flickered there, bright against the dark. One carried the echo of the old sin. The other carried the scent of returning. They stood in a circle of trees in his mind's eye, though he had never seen that place with his feet. One dark-haired, eyes gray, cloak snapping in a wind that mattered. The other silver-haired, eyes pale, wrapped in ghosts. He did not think in words as men did. He thought in currents of cold, in the creak of shifting ice, in the weight of millennia pressed into a single frozen breath. But if his intent could have been translated, it would have been simple. Them, the old anger stirred, not the hot rage of men, but a deep, slow burn that had lain banked for ages. He had been made to stand against something once. Fire, chaos, men forgotten that. The ones who made him had forgotten too. Only he remembered the first bargain. Cold in exchange for a world ordered and quiet. Men had broken the bargain, built walls, burned forests, bred like maggots in meat. When the silver-haired boy in the grove had reached for knowledge that was not his, the Night King had touched him and shown him a fraction of his own cold. A warning. It had not been heeded. Now there were two of them, two sparks of that same meddling heat. One who had died and returned. One who should have died and had not. Both had walked too close to the places his will brushed against the world. He would put them out. At a thought, the storm thickened, swirling around the army. Frost grew on armor. Snowflakes stopped mid-fall for a heartbeat, then rushed onward. The Night King moved his hand, not as a man would, but as an idea. The tide of the dead angled subtly, its front line shifting toward a new invisible point on the map. Toward Winterfell and the Godswood and the lights that burned there. His lieutenants turned their heads, sensing his focus. One stepped forward, ice spear scraping on frozen ground. He did not need to speak to them. They understood. Where his gaze fell, death would follow. Ahead, the world waited. The living sharpened steel and whispered prayers and argued over names. It did not matter. They were all the same in the end. Yet, as the army moved, the Night King felt the faintest stirring of something almost like curiosity. The new light, the son of the old sin, had already stood before him once, blade in hand, eyes defiant. He had died and returned. Few men did that. Fewer still walked toward death a second time knowing its taste. Perhaps, in another age, the Night King might have admired that. In this one, he would crush it. The ridge fell behind him as he moved, the army flowing forward like water seeking its level. The storm rolled ahead, blotting out the stars. In the Godswood of Winterfell, the heart tree's carved eyes wept flakes of old sap as if it, too, felt the approach. The yard at dusk was a different place than in the harsh light of morning. Shadows pooled in the corners. The sky overhead was a bruised purple, the first stars struggling to show through thin cloud. Torches hissed as snowflakes landed on their flames. Men had finished their drills and drifted away to food and sleep. Only a handful remained, drawn by the sight of two swords that drank the light in different ways. Jon Snow rolled his shoulders, feeling old bruises complain. Longclaw's familiar weight settled into his grip, the pale steel glinting. Across from him, Rhaegar Targaryen drew his own blade, a dark Valyrian steel sword whose name Jon did not yet know. Its edge seemed to move even when it was still. "Again," Jon said. "You're the one who called me out," Rhaegar replied, a faint smile touching his mouth. "Don't be surprised if I make you work for it." He moved first, stepping in with a simple cut toward Jon's chest. Jon parried, feeling the shock of impact travel up his arm. Rhaegar's strength was not brute like the mountains or clumsy like a green boy's. It was precise, honed, with a rhythm that reminded Jon of the harp more than the hammer. Each strike flowed into the next. They circled, blades whispering, boots sliding on packed snow. Ghost watched from the edge of the yard, tail low, eyes sharp. He didn't like strangers with swords near Jon. "You drop your right shoulder when you expect to faint," Rhaegar said between blows. "Watch it. A clever opponent will see it and drive you onto your back foot. Learned that on the trident, did you?" Jon grunted, batting aside a thrust. "On 100 practice fields before that," Rhaegar said. "The trident was where I forgot everything I knew in favor of pride." He twisted, bringing his blade up in a move that would have slipped under Jon's guard if Jon hadn't fought 100 duels with men bigger and faster. He turned his wrist, catching the blow and forcing it aside. Their blades locked, faces close. "You're not as good as Ser Arthur Dayne," Jon said. "But you're close." Rhaegar's eyes flickered. "No one was as good as Arthur," he said softly. "Except perhaps your uncle, when he had the right anger in him." They broke apart, breathing harder now. Snow dusted their hair and shoulders. Torches cast warm light on their blades. On the stone steps, Sansa and Arya had found a vantage point. Arya leaned forward, eyes bright, measuring each move. Sansa watched with arms folded, expression somewhere between concern and calculation. "That one?" Arya murmured as Jon sidestepped a thrust and brought Longclaw down in a controlled arc. "That's the cut Jon Snow always uses when his opponent is too aggressive. He lets them overcommit, then punishes it." "He looks lighter," Sansa said, surprising herself. "When he fights like this, as if the weight of the council chamber slips for a moment." "Steel is simpler than people," Arya said. "It doesn't lie." Near them, Daenerys stood, cloak drawn close, breath fogging. Her gaze did not leave the two men in the yard. Her dragons were nowhere in sight, but Jon could feel them distantly, restless, sensing his exertion, his focus. Tormund Giantsbane lounged against a post, chewing on something unidentifiable. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said. Jon Snow fighting his own sire, both with magic steel, in a castle full of kneelers and dragons. "Is that what he is to you?" Daenerys asked quietly. "His sire," Tormund shrugged. "He's the man whose seed made the boy," he said. "Ned Stark made the man. The dead will care more about the sword in his hand than the seed in his belly." In the yard, Rhaegar changed his approach. His strikes slowed, not from fatigue but by choice. He began to test Jon, probing his defenses, leaving small openings to see which ones Jon took. "You favor your left when you're uncertain," he observed. "You shift half a step that way, as if giving yourself room to run." "I've run enough," Jon said. He took a breath, forced himself to hold the center instead of yielding it. Rhaegar's mouth curved. "Good," he said. "The dead don't leave room to run. Better to choose where you'll stand and make them pay for every inch." Steel kissed steel. Sparks flew. "Arthur used to say something," Rhaegar added, almost conversationally, as he disengaged and came in again. "He said a sword is only as good as the hand that wields it and the heart that guides that hand. Valyrian steel doesn't make a coward brave or a fool wise." "And what did you say?" Jon asked, stepping into the rhythm now, anticipating the angle of Rhaegar's swings. "I said a sword also needs a song," Rhaegar replied. "Not the kind you play on a harp. The kind you live, the story you tell yourself about why you're swinging it." He feinted low, then brought his blade up. Jon saw the shift in his shoulders and met it, letting Longclaw slide along the dark steel, their hilts almost touching. "And what's your story now?" Jon asked. "Why are you swinging it?" "For you," Rhaegar said simply. "For the chance that you might live in a world where your children won't have to know my name." Something in Jon jolted. He pushed off, stepping back, sword lowered. "I don't know if I want children," he said. "I don't know if I'll live long enough to think about it." "You fight like a man who expects not to," Rhaegar said. "That can make you brave. It can also make you careless." He wiped his blade on the sleeve of his tunic and slid it home in its scabbard. "You're good," he said. "Better than I was at your age. Better than most men I've seen with a blade. The Night King won't beat you in a duel. He'll beat you with numbers, with cold." with the way fear creeps into the hearts of the men beside you when the dead don't fall as they should. Jon sheathed Longclaw. You sound like you've seen him do it, he said. Rhaegar's gaze drifted, for a heartbeat, somewhere far beyond the yard. In dreams, he said. I've watched him break lines of men who thought steel would save them. I've watched the light go out of their eyes and then come back wrong. He looked at Jon again and the distance cleared. We won't let that happen here, he said. Not while I still have a hand to hold a sword. Jon nodded once. Then we stand together in the Godswood, he said. Whatever else is true, whatever else we are, we stand there and make it as hard as we can for him to pass. Rhaegar inclined his head. For once, he said, I am content to follow another's plan. Arya watched them from the steps, jaw set. I want to see how the Night King fights when someone hits him where it hurts, she said. Sansa shivered, though the cold had not worsened. So do I, she said. I only hope we get to see it from the walls, not from the grave. Night pressed close to the walls. The storm had not yet arrived, but the air felt heavy, as if the sky were holding its breath. Most of Winterfell slept, or at least lay still in their blankets, eyes open, listening to each small creak and sigh. The great hall, so full earlier, had emptied. Only a few candles burned now, throwing more shadow than light. The long tables were mostly bare, save for a few cups and the odd forgotten trencher. Sansa Stark sat near the far end of one, fingers wrapped around a cup of wine gone cool. Tyrion Lannister sat across from her, his own cup half empty. Between them lay the comfortable silence of people who had survived worse conversations together. At the other end of the hall, near the hearth, Rhaegar Targaryen sat with his harp. His back was to them, shoulders slightly hunched. The firelight gilded the edges of his hair. He plucked at the strings softly, testing their tune. He shouldn't be there, Sansa said quietly, nodding toward the solitary figure. Not alone. Not on the eve of a battle like this. Some men prefer their ghosts without witnesses, Tyrion said. I imagine he has a few. Sansa sipped her wine. It tasted of oak and something sharp. What do you make of him? She asked. Tyrion considered. I make of him a man who has lived long enough to realize he was not the hero of the story he thought he was, he said. Which is more self-awareness than most princes ever achieve. Self-awareness doesn't bring back the dead, Sansa said, or give the North back its children. No, Tyrion agreed, but it might keep him from making the same mistakes twice. That has value. Sansa's gaze drifted to the banners above the dais. Stark, Targaryen. When I was a girl, she said, I dreamed of Rhaegar Targaryen. The songs painted him as a golden prince who sang in tourneys and gave queens roses. I imagined myself as the woman he chose, the one he crowned with winter roses. She smiled, small and bitter. Then I learned what men like that do to girls like me, she went on. How little crowns protect you when you're alone with them. Tyrion's face flickered, guilt and anger and old shame crossing it. You're not that girl anymore, he said. No, Sansa said, but the North remembers her, and it remembers what his choices cost. She watched Rhaegar's silhouette. The notes he plucked were soft, slow, not a full song, more like pieces of one, broken and reassembled. Do you trust him? She asked. I trust that he hates himself more than he lets on, Tyrion said, and that he wants Jon Snow to live. That's enough for now. Do you trust Jon Snow? Sansa asked. Tyrion's smile was easier. I trust that Jon Snow will walk into the Seven Hells if he thinks it will save one person he's sworn himself to, he said, whether that person deserves it or not. It's infuriating. It's also why people follow him. He's a Stark, Sansa said. Whatever name you put on him, whatever claim. He's still the boy who gave me his cloak when Joffrey tore my father's name from my dress. And a Targaryen, Tyrion said. The world will insist on making something of that. If we live through this battle, there will be letters and ravens and lords sniffing around for advantage. They'll try to make him their king or cut him down before he becomes one. Sansa's lips thinned. "I won't let the North be dragged into another war over a throne it never wanted," she said. "If Jon Snow survives, he'll want to go south and fix everything. That's who he is. I may have to be the one who reminds him that our people come first." "You may," Tyrion agreed. "But you won't be alone at that table if it comes to it." He lifted his cup. "To the uncomfortable conversations we'll have to survive if we survive the dead," he said. Sansa touched her cup to his. "To surviving," she said. At the hearth, Rhaegar's fingers found a progression that sounded almost like a lullaby. The melody wound through the empty hall, soft as a breath. "It's strange," Sansa said, "to hear the songs that used to live only in my head. To have the man who haunted them sitting in my hall. Does he still look like the man you imagined?" Tyrion asked. She shook her head. "No," she said. "He looks smaller, sadder, but more real." Tyrion nodded. "That's ages for you," he said. "They sand men down until all that's left are the edges that cut themselves." The harp's notes slowed, then stopped. Rhaegar's shoulders sagged. He set the instrument aside and sat for a long moment staring into the fire. "Whatever else he is," Sansa said, "he's another piece on the board. One we didn't know we had yesterday. We'll use him as we must. If he lives, we can decide what to do with him after." "Pragmatic as ever," Tyrion said. "I like that about you." Sansa's gaze lingered on Rhaegar for a heartbeat more, then shifted to the dark rafters overhead. "The dead are coming," she murmured. "We can untangle our family knots later. If there's a later." The hall held its breath with her. Winterfell slept, as much as any fortress on the edge of the end of the world could. On the walls, men stamped their feet and beat life back into their hands. Unsullied stood like statues, eyes forward. Free folk muttered jokes to keep their teeth from chattering. Northern boys who had never seen war stared into the dark and imagined shapes where there were none. In the yards, armor stood ready on racks, polished as if gleam could turn blades. Barrels of dragonglass-tipped arrows lined the battlements. Barrels of pitch waited to be poured and lit. The air smelled of oil and cold iron and fear. Near the broken towers, the dragons lay coiled, restless. Drogon's great head lifted now and then, nostrils flaring, as if he could taste the cold that was coming. Rhaegar shifted his wings, snorting steam. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, not like the blue of the dead, but like embers under ash. In the Godswood, the heart tree watched. Its red leaves rustled without wind. The face carved in its bark seemed deeper tonight, grooves darker, eyes more sunken. Snow lay thick around its roots, broken only by the tracks of men who had come and gone to speak with the boy in the chair beneath its branches. Bran Stark sat there now, alone, wrapped in furs, breath little plumes before his lips. His eyes were closed. The rest of him might have been carved from the same wood as the heart tree. He flew. Through Raven's wings, he saw the army of the dead as a stain on the land, stretching from horizon to horizon. Thousands of Wights, their movements synchronized, their heads tilted in the same unnatural angle. Giants lumbered at their flanks, dragging massive chains. Among them, every so often, the pale, icy forms of White Walkers strode like shepherds among their flock. He saw the Night King at their head, tall and terrible on a dead horse, spear in hand, cloak of mist trailing. His eyes were twin stars of blue. They were closer now, 2 days' march at most, perhaps less. The storm that rode with them obscured details, but Bran could taste the cold in his bones. It was not like the winter he remembered as a child. This was older, deeper, a cold that did not merely numb, but erased. He pulled back, through the eyes of ravens perched on bare branches, on ruined walls, on stones half buried in snow. He swept over the gap at Eastwatch, where ice still groaned. Over the black ribbon of the King's Road, half swallowed by drifts. Over small, abandoned villages where doors hung open and fires had long since died. Then he returned to Winterfell. He saw Jon Snow on the ramparts, cloak wrapped tight, ghost at his side. Jon's face was turned north, jaw set, eyes shadowed. The wolf's ears twitched, catching some distant sound Bran's human ears could not. He saw Daenerys Targaryen standing on a tower, hair unbound, hands clutching the stone as she stared toward where her dragons slept. For a moment, she looked very young. Then she straightened, and the queen settled back over her shoulders. He saw Sansa in her chambers, cloak laid aside, a scrap of parchment in her hand. She stared at it without seeing the words, lips moving silently as she rehearsed lines she might have to say if the world survived the next week. He saw Arya cleaning needle by candlelight, the little sword's slender blade gleaming. Her face was calm, almost serene. Beyond her, the faces on the wall watched without eyes. He saw Rhaegar in the small bed they had given him, lying on his back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. His hands were folded over his chest. The harp leaned against the wall within reach. His sword lay on the floor beside him, unsheathed, as if he did not trust himself to reach leather and steel fast enough if the dead came in the night. Bran slipped back into himself with a soft gasp. The cold of the Godswood was almost a relief after the cold he had ridden in the storm. Snow drifted down, dusting his blanket, his hair, the arms of the chair. He tilted his head back to look up at the heart tree's branches, at the small slivers of sky visible between them. "They're close," he said aloud, though no one was there to hear. Too close for more secrets. His words misted and vanished. Tomorrow, he knew, they would walk the Godswood with Jon and Rhaegar, laying out where each man would stand when the dead reached the walls. They would mark the trees where dragonglass would hang. They would argue about whether hiding the women and children in the crypts was safety or folly when the enemy could raise the dead. Tomorrow, the North would wake knowing for certain that death marched on its gates. Tonight, Winterfell stood between two worlds. The one that had been, with its stories of princes and rebels and stolen brides, and the one that might be, if they lived long enough to see it. Bran closed his eyes again. For a brief moment, before he reached back into the storm, he let himself remember a time when winters meant snowball fights and hot bread and old Nan's tales by the fire. Then he let it go. The ravens took wing, flurries of black against the snow. The Night King's army flowed on, tireless. On the horizon, a faint, unnatural glow flickered, blue and cold, like frozen lightning trapped in clouds. Winterfell's torchlight answered, a small, defiant band of orange in the vast dark. Between them, in the quiet spaces, walked Jon Snow and Rhaegar Targaryen, each carrying a story that had begun long before they were born, each about to step into the part of it that could not be sung or prophesied, only lived.